If you're looking for the latest Georgia Bulldog news in football, basketball, baseball, and recruiting, then you are in the right place.
It's third down, Bryce Young's career. You need 10, play clock at 4. From the pocket, launching downfield, underthrown and intercepted. Keely Ringo has an escort down the sidelines. All the way to the end zone, and Georgia is going to conquer the Crimson Tide.
Hosted by Jeremiah Stoddard and Jonathan Williams.
Georgia on the mountaintop. Demons be gone, and the drought is over. National champions at long last.
Just sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for these hot takes you're about to listen to.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Classic City Sports. As always, Jeremiah Stoddard along with my buddy Jonathan Williams have an action-packed episode as always for you guys. Obviously, we got to talk a little bit about Kentucky. Then we're going to talk about something, as you can see in the title, is can Georgia go back-to-back, or will Georgia go back-to-back? We will get into that pretty deep as well. And then Georgia and Kirby Smart are on the rise of doing something pretty historical. And if you really look at like the way he's doing things, it's really interesting to see. And then, as always, King of the Hill. And then, we got the nerds on Saturday, so I'm sure we'll talk about that for a minute as well. Right, Jonathan? I know that's got to be discussed for a minute, right?
I guess, it kind of sucks that, how one of your biggest rivals, throughout history and, your in-state rival has just become it's just another game at this point. No Georgia fan, or at least, majority of Georgia fans, I feel like, don't even get excited for this game anymore because of how bad Georgia Tech has been in recent years. And I looked it up the other day, and Georgia Tech has only beaten Georgia 3 times since 2001.
Yep.
So it's just,
yeah,
it has not been, and they've only scored a total of, I want to say 28 points or something like that in the last 4 or so, or in the last 4 years. Outside of that one time that they got Kirby Smart in Georgia in his first year, it's been all of Georgia. They got shut out last year, and they just have not been able to do anything, find any type of success since Kirby Smart has arrived.
Yeah, it's definitely there's been conversation. I know you and I've talked about this, and we really said is it really a rivalry anymore? I think to be a rivalry, you have to have some back and forth. You have to have some competition. And right now, at least the current state of it, you have no competition. You have no back and forth. And so I don't really know if I would call it a rivalry. At least it's not in the heat of its rivalry, in the sense of there's not a lot of competition right now. You really go into this game knowing how the thing's going to play out. And I'm not saying overlook Georgia Tech and look on to LSU like some people might, but because they did just beat North Carolina, who was a potential playoff team based on the way they were. Now, they were barely winning some games throughout the entire year, and they were basically on the brink of losing 6 different games, I think, where they won within 3 points or somewhere along those lines. So they weren't exactly like a powerhouse team, but Georgia Tech did beat them recently, and they've been winning a few games since they've got their interim head coach now that Jeff Collins is gone. So it's not a team that you want to just completely overlook and act like you don't need to care about it, because, and we know this, we talked about this before, was Kirby Smart doesn't do that either. He is focused on this team. He was mad that Kentucky had a 6-hour head start on him getting ready for game planning because Georgia had a later game than they did that day. So he's not going to overlook that game. But we'll go ahead and start. Speaking of Kentucky, let's go ahead and jump into that. Jonathan, we were there. It was absolutely freezing, right? So you're not going to have your game plan that some people expect to have, where you just air it out and really just drive up the score, which is what people would want. And yes, Kentucky ended up being kind of in that game at the end of it. They had a chance to win that game late in that game. But Georgia walks away with the win. How are you feeling about everything, knowing how the weather conditions were? And I'm not saying blame the weather like Tennessee fans and other people like that. I'm just saying, knowing the current situation it was, are you happy with the performance that you saw on Saturday?
I guess so. And Dan, I see your comments about me sounding a little weird. I'll go ahead and say I was irresponsible, did not bring my mic home for the holiday week. So I'm going through the speakers in my laptop. So if the quality's down, I apologize for that. I also have a whining dog downstairs. So if you hear that as well. just how we're rolling with it tonight, man. You know, you got to get the content out, and you just got to push through adversity, man. That's what Kirby Smart would tell me to do. You got to attack the day to the best of your abilities, and so that's how I'm going to do it. But the Kentucky game, it was interesting because Kentucky fans pretty much left at halftime. They were like, it was
They did.
like, especially the sections that you and me were in, like it was a ghost town
They
around us.
cleared
Like
out.
people were leaving at halftime, and like everybody just kind of assumed Georgia's going to roll in the second half. This isn't going to be a game, and then before you know it, Kentucky has a chance to tie up the football game, and obviously they didn't, but they got within striking distance, so they made it a little bit of a game there at the end. But I think the biggest factor that kind of tells you that Georgia did not run their typical style offense is that Stetson Bennett had 19 attempts against Kentucky, and he's been average. He's probably averaging, I don't know the exact number, but he's probably averaging close to like 34 attempts on the season. So that there's a major drop off there. Clearly they didn't pass the ball around. You couldn't, man. There was like 15, 20 mile per hour winds. It was freezing cold. There was no need to. So if you could win the game by just running the ball, killing clock, and getting the heck out of there, then that's what you're going to do. And so that's what they did. And you got the win. That's all that matters. At this point in the year, I mean, there's no need for these style points.
By the way, 31 attempts a game is what he's averaged, including this game. Like, so he's been throwing the crap out of the ball. So you're very accurate with that comment. It was kind of like last year. You know, like it was one of those games where he threw the ball 19 times, and you're going, yeah, that's how they game planned last year the entire season, where he would throw for the 14 times sometimes, and Georgia would just roll, right? I think this is what you and I talked about, and it's one of those things where Georgia came into the game with a game plan, right? They knew it was cold, they knew it was windy, they knew it was just not a ideal scenario for your, run and gun offense where you're just slinging it everywhere and all that kind of stuff. And they definitely relied heavy on their run game. They definitely said, we're going to line up, we're going to run the ball a ton, 46 times, and we're going to do it successfully. Well, yeah, you ran for 247 yards on Saturday on 46 attempts, and your leading rusher was Kenny McIntosh with 143 yards, that's a great day. He's only the second Georgia running back to go over 100 yards this season. So that's a darn good day on the season right now. And you had somebody else, Robinson, I think, was at what, like 97 or something like that?
He was at 98 when he played Auburn.
Auburn, yeah. So we've been close, but this is the best running performance that you've had on the season from an individual guy, and as a team, that's a lot of yards offensively. And it's not your 500 yards a game kind of thing, but you still had 363 yards of total offense. With the weather conditions that you were in, honestly, I'll take that win and walk away knowing that you survived it. Because think about, like, you get into bad weather games, stuff can go poorly for you. Ohio State had a really bad weather game a couple weeks ago, and they struggled against a non-competitive team, a team that's not on their level as well. But it was really windy. They had to change their game plan. They're happy to walk away with a win. Tennessee came into Athens. They blamed it on the rain. They lost that game. Georgia walks away from this game, and not saying you blame it on the weather, because I don't think you blame it on the weather. I think you adapt to the weather, and as long as you can win in different scenarios, and that's what Kirby Smart talked about in his post-game press conference or in his post-game speech to his team. The video came out this week on that, and he was saying, I love you guys. You can win in so many different environments, in different ways. That's what I want to see. And that tells you that they came in there going, hey, this is not a normal day-to-day that we're used to. We're going to do things differently, but we're going to show that we can still win this way. Now, one thing that Georgia definitely cannot continue to do moving forward, because at this point you get Georgia Tech and then you get an SEC championship game against LSU, and then you're in the playoffs. You cannot keep kicking so many freaking field goals. You got to stop stalling in the red zone. You've got to be able to punch that ball in on 4th and inches or 4th and 1 in the goal line. You've got to score that touchdown. Those are the things that worried me, because that's been something all season long that we've dealt with, is these field goals. And so what do they have to do, right? What does Georgia need to do to be able to, like that last one, 4th and 1? And I feel like this is something that 4th and short or 3rd and short yardage situations they've struggled with a lot. They're not getting the push they need on these runs or whatever they need to do. They got to get a little more creative or something, because they're not getting that push up front on those short yardage plays. That's the issue that I have with Georgia on Saturday, and I know you do too, because that's been an all season long problem.
Yeah, definitely red zone. It's funny because anybody who would go and look at like red zone conversion rates in college football, Georgia's at the top. They're the highest rated conversion rate in the red
scoring,
zone
yeah.
amongst all college football teams in the FBS. But the kicker is that they're kicking a lot of field goals. The kicker is they're kicking a lot of field goals. But it's funny, and it's also weird because Georgia is up for potentially winning the Joe Moore Award. At least I think that's what it's called, and it's for the best offensive line
Yeah.
unit in all of college football. Because for the other 90 yards or whatever, they are fantastic. They're one of the best. They are clearly one of the best units in college football. I don't think they've given up a sack for Stetson Bennett in like 4 straight games, I want to say. But it's just those 10 yards. They just have not been able to figure it out this year, and they're getting stuffed in the run game, and it's just a lack. They're not being able to get a lot of push up there. So that's been an issue, and it's been an issue all year. So you kind of hope and pray that it doesn't come when it comes to playoffs or whatever, that it doesn't come down to a goal line situation for Georgia to win the game potentially, because they hadn't looked good in those situations. Even with the jumbo package, they put in Jalen Carter a few times like they did with Jordan Davis in years past, and even those plays haven't really panned out for them the way that they did last year. They have not had a high success rate with those either. So still trying to figure those things out, and it's definitely something they got to get better at. But at the same time, you're at your final regular season game, so you kind of are what you are in those situations.
Yep.
There's not a lot of time to just say like, well, we can get better. But the good news is that once you get out of the SEC championship game, you pretty much have 3 or 4 weeks to game plan for your playoff game. So maybe there's time. There's a window there for you to kind of fix those issues, kind of analyze and get those things cleaned up.
Yeah, exactly. And once again, Georgia's obviously 11-0. So they're winning these games, and they've settled for a lot of field goals in some of these games. Like the games that Georgia struggled in has been field goal games. You had Samford was a lower scoring game. I think it was the 31-0 game, but still shut them out. So it wasn't like a close game. It was just lower scoring than what you've seen some. A few field goals in that game. Kent State kicked several field goals in that game. That was a tough one. And then Missouri, a close game, very close game that you're happy to just win and walk away from. A lot of field goals in that game. And then this past weekend, you're kicking a lot of field goals again. The games that Georgia struggles in is when they're having to settle for those field goals because they're getting, like you said, they're driving the field. They're getting all the way, right? And they're scoring points. They're just not getting in the end zone as much as you need them to in some of these games where you need them to now score, 40 points a game or something like that as they had all season. That average has now dropped from 41 points a game, I think it was a couple weeks ago. Now it's down to 38 points a game, back to right around where it was last season offensively. So you're no longer having that 40-plus point game season anymore because you've had a couple of low-scoring weeks. So you've got to hope that they can figure something out, or they just score from a little bit longer of a distance, and so they don't have to get into those short yardage plays. That's what how you fix it for Georgia at this point, because like you said, you are who you are. You're not going to be able to go out there and just fix the problem at the front line of scrimmage in the sense of getting that extra yard push that you haven't been able to get all season long. It's a constant problem that's not going to fix in 1 week. What you can fix, though, is try to keep yourself out of those short yardage situations. Stop getting in those 1 yard situations at the goal line, or score a little further out so you don't find yourself in that spot. That's going to be the easiest way to fix the problem at this point, because what else are you supposed to do? They're loading the box on you. They're going straight down the middle on you, knowing that's where you're going, unless you just get really creative with play calling to try to stretch the field in those situations to where they have to open up the gaps for you a little bit better in the middle. It's going to be a tough spot. Honestly, I don't know how much you can really do in that aspect of it at this point. Like you said, you are who you are at this point in the season. It's week 12, final regular season game. Stetson Bennett took a pretty big hit this week with his yardage, only going for 100 and something yards, 118 or whatever it was. I closed the thing, so I don't see it right now. But so now he's not on track for having as many yards as we talked about. He kind of had a big hit to that. But he could go out there this week against Georgia Tech and throw for 380 or something like that and 4 touchdowns. And all of a sudden he kind of opens up that conversation. And it was 116 yards for him this week. So, but once again, as a total offense, you take the production you had, you move on from this week. It was really cold. I think it got down to about 19 degrees. You had up to 20-mile-an-hour winds. You and I almost froze to death sitting there. So honestly, I'm not one of those fans that goes, it just looked terrible. I can't, it almost doesn't feel good to win like that. No, man, I was sitting in those stands. I'm happy to walk away with a win, knowing that, you live to fight another day and you're still in a spot to go undefeated regular season for the first time back to back since Alabama did it, right? In 15.
Yeah, it'd be the first time in program history, and the first time since Alabama did in 2008 and 2009 is when they did it.
And that's in
So yeah,
reference to SEC football teams.
you're on the verge of making some history there, both program and nationally wise. But yeah, the good news is, like you said, you're still undefeated. You still control your own destiny, and you're pretty much a lock in for the playoffs no matter what happens. You just have to get through this week now. You have to get through Georgia Tech, which it looks like there's some rain in the forecast this week. So Georgia's going to have to overcome some more weather. They're going to have to do it again. The good news is they're probably going to be playing in a lot of domes after this week. You got the Benz in the SEC championship. You probably get the Benz in the playoff, and then you're going to go out to where it's in
I think it's
Los
SoFi.
Angeles.
Yeah, SoFi,
you got
I think,
SoFi
right?
Stadium, so you'll be all right after that. You won't have to worry about these cold and rainy days
Climate
anymore.
controlled,
Yeah.
everything. You don't have to worry about the weather anymore. It'll be
Everything's
beautiful.
going to
Georgia,
be just all right.
exactly.
But
Georgia's going to be fine. Not concerned about that at all. But let's go ahead and jump to our next thing on it. And this is something that that you kind of you were spearheading, so I'm going to let you take over real quick.
yeah, can Georgia go back to back? Could they become the first team in college football playoff history to go back to back? It's something that nobody's been able to do. You know, Clemson and Alabama both had chances at doing it. They duked it out for, what was it, 3 years straight that they were in the championship together? It's just ridiculous. So they all had a chance. They couldn't get it done. Now Georgia has a chance. And the thing is, you know, I was having a conversation with a friend today. Part of me feels like Georgia is about to just waltz to another national title. You know, you kind of look at the competition that Georgia could potentially going up against, names like TCU potentially being in there, a Pac-12 team in USC, maybe Clemson slips in there, or maybe you get both Michigan and Ohio State, depending on how everything else plays out and how their game plays out as well. A lot of those games, Georgia's going to be a pretty heavy favorite. I mean, just for the SEC championship, I believe Georgia opened up as a 16.5-point favorite. I don't know if that line has moved, but
Yeah.
that's the number 6 team in the
It's
nation
15
right now. Or are they number 5 right now?
They're number 5, and it's a 15-point spread.
So the number 5 team, according to the College Football Playoff Committee, and you're a 16.5-point favorite in that game. That kind of says a lot about how everybody views Georgia right now, and especially compared to all the other competitions. So there's a really good chance that Georgia just kind of cruises on to another national title. But then on the other side, you have to think too, like, it can't be that easy. There's no way that winning a national title again can be that easy for Georgia. Surely there's got to be some kind of competition or someone that plays them a lot better than you wouldn't have expected to. But at the same time, like, in those big games, like, everybody thought that Tennessee was going to be this big matchup and that Tennessee was really going to test Georgia. And Georgia just dominated that game in every single way. So, like, every single big game that Georgia's had to get up for, they've dominated in. So that has to be kind of alarming to anybody that could potentially draw them in the playoff. And it's looking like Georgia probably is going to be playing a TCU or a USC in the first round. And I think everybody likes Georgia's chances in that game, especially considering how their defense is compared to everybody else's, especially a Big 12 or a Pac-12 team. It's just, you have to really like Georgia's current situation, especially if they do indeed win out and they lock up that number 1 seed and you get a pretty much another home game in Atlanta for the first round. It's looking pretty good for Georgia.
It's absolutely looking really good for Georgia. The the one game that I think everybody kind of expects to be the game that stands out to you, kind of like last year. You know, last year, especially once the Final Four shook out and you said you got Cincinnati and you got Michigan in there. Nobody was worried about Cincinnati or Michigan. Everyone said it's going to be Bama, Georgia in the national championship game. Those guys will duke it out and we'll find out what's going to happen. Same thing this year. If Ohio State makes it through this Saturday, which they're at home and I think favored by 7.5 points over Michigan, if they win that game, that's the one that you're going to be looking for. You're going to look through the first round, and at that point, you say they win that game. You're probably going to have a Georgia versus USC if they stay undefeated in the first round, and then you'll have a Ohio State and TCU potentially first round. And so then in those matchups, you're going to go, all right, cool. We're going to have Georgia and Ohio State in the national championship game. Same thing we did last year. We saw it and we go, all right, it's going to be Bama and Georgia in the national championship game. You're going to do the same thing this year as long as everything stays the way it currently is. And even if things don't, I mean, they are casually slipping Bama back up into the conversation, aren't they? They put them at 7 this week. They're trying to inch them back in for a chaos scenario, and so they can slip them back in the playoffs. But that would be the first 2-loss team. It would be fitting for that to be Bama, wouldn't it? If they put a 2-loss Bama in the SEC or in the 4th spot, that would be kind of fitting for them. But no, the other spot is, I mean, LSU. You could have some hectic stuff if Georgia were to lose to LSU. That would put them in at the 4 and Georgia at 3, or vice versa, whatever way they wanted to do it. And then that would change some of the stuff as well. Ohio State would be 1, and you would have maybe a TCU at 2 at that point. But same thing in that scenario. You got Georgia playing TCU and Ohio State playing LSU. Most likely, you're still going to get Ohio State and Georgia in the national championship game. And I think Georgia would match up pretty well with Ohio State. That is the team to look at that you don't really know, like kind of what you're talking about. You feel like you could walk to and win a national championship right now, but at the same time, you expect somebody to give you some fits. I think it would be Ohio State. I think that's the team that you would have to look at and say they would be able to play you a lot better than anybody else in the runnings right now.
Yeah, I mean, just the history of teams that have given Georgia problems has been NFL dudes under center, and that's what CJ Stroud is. Those are the types of guys that have given, if anybody has given Georgia issues on defense, it's been those types of people. And CJ Stroud is absolutely one of those guys that have a really good offense under Ryan Day. They got some really good wide receivers, as they always do. So those are the types of teams that typically do challenge Georgia. And that's why I told you before the show, I think if you are Georgia, your dream scenario is that Michigan beats Ohio State pretty handily. That way you don't have any type of argument to even keep Ohio State in there. TCU
Right.
wins out, and then USC slips up, and Clemson wins out, and they win the ACC. And then you got Georgia, Michigan, TCU, and Clemson. Those are the 4 teams. And I think Georgia would be pretty heavily favored over all 3 of those teams. I just, especially with
Or
how
USC
Michigan's
slipping in that scenario, possibly over Clemson as
Yeah.
well. One of either way in that scenario, you're going. I like Georgia's chances against all of those teams. We saw what Georgia did against Michigan last year. Michigan's still very much the same type of football team they were last year, so that's not going to change in that spot. The biggest thing would be the unfamiliarity with some of these teams, right? Like you have never played USC, or you have. I don't know if you have or not. Honestly, with a USC, I'd have to go back and
I
look
don't
at the
know.
history, but. Somebody in the comments, if y'all want to do a favor, has Georgia ever played USC in football before? I don't know. The other one would be, TCU. Georgia has played TCU in recent years. They beat TCU in a bowl game a couple years ago, I
Liberty
think.
Bowl.
Yeah, they did beat them. So
With
they
Jacob
have a
Eason.
little bit more, but you got teams that you don't ever play. You've played Michigan, you know how to beat them, but you haven't played Ohio State, in a long time either. So that's where you really kind of get hurt, is the unfamiliarity. But the good thing is those teams are also unfamiliar with you. So they don't know how to play you either. And so at that point, it comes down to the coach's game plan and what they're able to put together with your guys. And honestly, I'm trusting Kirby Smart at this point. Like, I mean, the guy has showed you no reason not to trust him in those type of situations. So I do think that Georgia could be in a really, really good spot this year to walk to another national championship game. And as long as they get there, I think they have a darn good chance of winning it. And that would be crazy because, like you said, that nobody's been able to do it in the college football playoff era, winning back-to-back national championships. It is tough. It is tough to do. And Georgia already making history within their own program, going back-to-back undefeated seasons as long as they get through Saturday against Georgia Tech, and back-to-back undefeated divisional series or season that they've done already at this point after beating Kentucky. These are things that don't happen very often. And it's a fun thing to sit back and watch. Okay, UGA is 0-3 versus USC all time. Last game was in 1960. Thank you, Dan. So basically, they haven't played in 62 years. So that's a team you haven't played in a very long time, and you've only ever played them 3 times. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty unfamiliar, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. But that's what's fun about the college football playoff. That's what's so exciting about it, is that you get these teams that typically would never play against one another, and that's what makes it so much fun. And unfortunately, there's going to be a whole lot more of it when the 12-team playoff. And I'll just go ahead and say, if the 12-team playoff does exist, like, we're not having these conversations anymore about, like, if TCU loses, if USC loses, etc. That no longer exists. All those teams are already going to be in the playoff unless they just absolutely get demolished along their path, and they just get absolutely kicked out of the playoff because they just had a major screw up along their schedule. So, but I'm not here to rain on the parade of the people that wanted playoff expansion. It's just, But the fact that we are having this discussion about Kirby Smart and his football team potentially just waltzing to another national title and just, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, guys. I don't know what else to do. I have to keep her in her cage. So, like,
You're good. You're good.
Man,
Dude.
I'm sorry, guys. The dogs are here, baby. The dogs are barking.
The dogs
all right?
are
They're
barking,
ready.
man.
They're ready
They're
for
ready
this
to
weekend,
go.
man. Hope you're ready, Georgia Tech. And so I think that goes into the discussion I want to have about what Kirby Smart has done at the University of Georgia in such a short period of time, because now the comparisons are really ramping up about, like, what Kirby Smart is doing at Georgia, what Nick Saban did at Alabama. And I've kind of formulated this opinion that what Kirby Smart has had to endure during his time of revamping kind of Georgia and taking them to that next level has been a whole heck of a lot more difficult than what, say, like Nick Saban had to do back in like the mid 2000s. And here's why. Think about the amount of change that Georgia has had to go through, and just college football in general, what college football has gone through over the last 6 years. The transfer portal got introduced, so now players can just kind of go all over the place, all willy nilly, and you're taking in players. You got to manage a roster now. Numbers are a lot more crucial because maybe you want to take in a transfer guy. That means some guys might have to leave, but if some guys wants to stay, so you really got to figure all that out. He's had to go through that. He's also had to go through NIL now. NIL has become a huge deal, not only just with your players currently on the roster and getting all of that straightened out, but even in recruiting now. You've had to change that. You kind of had to fight against it. You've had to battle with it, kind of adapt to see how you can still remain competitive with NIL being a factor, like schools like Texas A&M all of a sudden bringing in number one classes. Now, obviously, that hasn't done too much for them yet, but at the same time, they took a lot of players from you in that class, and a lot of people pointed fingers because of the NIL money. So he's had to go through that as well. And then this is the biggest factor. He's had to get over the Nick Saban hump, which we know how long that's taken. And that's one thing Nick Saban never had to do while he was building up Alabama.
Absolutely.
He never had to beat himself. He never had to go through Alabama. Kirby Smart has had to do that. He's had to have these growing pains. It took him 4 tries to defeat Alabama finally got over it. So him going through all of that within 6 years, now 7, that's a heck of a lot of stuff to go through, Stoddard, is while trying to get to the peak, get to the pinnacle of getting to a national title. And now not only has he won a national title and has a ring on his finger, he has a great chance of doing it again in back-to-back years after a 41-year drought at the university.
No, and the crazy thing too is talking about that, kind of connecting everything into the back-to-back type run, is after last year and Georgia had 15 players drafted and everyone's going, they're just going to be the 2019 LSU Tigers and they're going to have to rebuild back from that because they are going to have to reload from how many people they lost that were starters, and the 5 guys on your defense that were in the first round or something. Like it was insane. Like, so you had to do all of that, right? And after losing 8, I'm going to use your tweet. I'm going to steal Jonathan's tweet. So you should be following him on social media. If you haven't, this is his tweet that I'm going to read off. So after losing 8 of your starters to the NFL, UGA still has on defense, that was 8 starters on defense. On this defense, they still have a finalist for the Butkus Award, a semi-finalist for the Outland Trophy, a finalist for the, Nagurski Trophy? I don't know how to pronounce it. And then the number 1 scoring defense in the nation. After losing all of those people. That is different. Nobody, you tell me who's done that. I mean, that's insane.
I can already go ahead and tell you that nobody's done it because I had a tweet that told you that anybody that had that amount of players drafted, all of them, every single one of them had immediate drop-off the next season. They lost at least 2 games the very next season. Some didn't even go on to win their division and their conference following having just like 10 players drafted. UGA had 15 players drafted this past offseason, and yet they're still the number 1 team. Arguably should have never lost their number 1 ranking. Like, they should have been the top team in college football from week 1 until now. There has been no reason why they shouldn't have. So we're talking about a team that hasn't had any type of drop-off whatsoever. Still the number 1 scoring defense. Offense got even better. And now they're about to stamp another appearance in the college football playoff and be the overwhelming favorite to win a national title. After all of that, it's ridiculous. And I honestly don't think it's being talked about enough.
No, it's not. And it was like, it's one of those things that, like, had Georgia not had a couple of struggle games in the season, like early on in the year, they would probably be talking about that right now. Because think about how they were at the beginning of the year. After Georgia beat South Carolina 49-7, they go, oh crap, this is probably one of those dominant teams we've watched. This guy is good. They're good. Georgia then proceeds to struggle for a couple of games, and then they fall out of the media darling kind of like vantage point. They're no longer looking like that team anymore, and so they stop talking about it. Had Georgia not struggled a couple of times, this would be something you hear all the time, but it's not right now, and it's just so weird. You're still hearing them talk about Alabama. You're still hearing them talk about Tennessee. Tennessee just got absolutely boat raced this last weekend against South Carolina, like the team that Georgia beat, by the way, 49-7. I understand it's a different time of year, but you let Tennessee. This is a detour in the conversation because I just got distracted, and I'm very ADD, so
Oh
it is
no,
what it
Tennessee
is.
deserves this. Go ahead and speak your mind.
Tennessee,
They absolutely deserve this.
Tennessee gave up 9 touchdowns in 10 possessions. They gave up 1 punt, or they had a couple other 2 other possessions. One was to end the first half, and one was to end the game. But every possession that ended in a punt or score or something, they were 9 for 10. You let them score a touchdown every single time they touch the ball. I mean, that is
Dude,
dog water defense,
South
my man.
Carolina ran
Oh
out of
my God.
fireworks. Like they shoot off
They
fireworks when
did.
they score touchdowns. They ran out of them because they didn't expect them to score that many points. Like that is hysterical to me. The fact that your team played so well that you couldn't even celebrate their touchdowns anymore because you didn't pack enough
Dude,
fireworks. You didn't pack enough
they ran
ammunition for it.
out.
Goodness.
I mean, golly. So that team, and they're hopefully we won't hear much about them anymore because we had to keep hearing about them after Georgia beat them. You
Oh,
still had to hear from their fan base. You had to hear from the media still talking about, can they get in the playoffs? Will they get in the playoffs? All of this talk about everything. No, they're finally out after getting destroyed, completely dismantled this past weekend. You can finally say you don't have to think about that orange, ugly team making it back in the playoffs or being in the conversation anymore. It's finally completely dissolved. But no, Georgia being out of the like not being talked about as like that dominant team anymore, I think it's disrespectful to the program and to Kirby Smart. But I think it's perfect for Kirby Smart. He loves it. He does. He doesn't want to be the media darling where everyone loves him and is talking so good about him. He loves being the team that people don't want to sit here and respect. He wants to be the team that they are upsetting or calling for upset picks against all the time. He wants to be that team because he thrives in that situation. It's normal for him. I really do think that he feels that it motivates his guys for it a lot more than if they were the team that's just everyone looking up to, right? I think he likes that. And I think it's exactly where he wants to be. Yeah, they're the number 1 team in the country, but they're still having people talk about, you still got Ohio State out there. And everyone's talking about Ohio State being a problem for them. Guess what? This past weekend, every top team barely won. So Georgia's not feeling bad about barely winning this last week because all of the top teams, TCU won on a last-second field goal over Baylor.
absolutely
Ohio State
insanity.
was up by 6 points before they ended up getting a defensive touchdown to make it a 13-point game in the last couple of moments of that game. So, and Michigan struggled too. I can't
Barely
remember
scraped by with Illinois.
yeah, they barely scraped. Oh,
And
and there was a
probably
call
got
in that game.
yeah.
There was a call in that game that they talked about that could have taken the game out of the hands
Yeah.
of Illinois. That could
Definitely
have won
helped
that game.
Michigan out a little bit.
So all of those teams that are in the top teams, and USC almost lost. They were struggling early in that game against, was it UCLA? And they were losing for a long time in that game, and they ended up winning by a little bit. Every top team struggled last week. So Georgia does not care that they barely beat Kentucky because everyone struggled last week. There was a lot of cold and bad weather throughout the entire country last week. So it was just a different type of football that you got to see from everybody. And Georgia lasted. They just kept winning. That's all you got to do, man. You just got to keep winning.
Yeah, I mean, you go out and win the way you did against Kentucky the next 5 weeks or the next 4 games or whatever, no one's going to be complaining. Nobody would have a care in the world about how you played in those games. As long as you keep winning from here on out, that's all that matters. Keep adding W's to the win column, and you're going to be putting your name in the history of college football books. So that's all that matters right now. And so Kirby Smart's definitely got his team in a good position. We know Kirby Smart does not get complacent about teams. He doesn't look ahead. He doesn't do any of that type of stuff, or at least he tells us that he doesn't. So even if the weather is a factor on Saturday, I don't see that being an issue. Especially, I mean, it's just kind of a weird situation for Georgia Tech. You're in between coaches. They have gotten some big wins. In fact, the
They have.
Keys has won more games this season than Jeff Collins did in his last 3 seasons with Georgia Tech. Put that in perspective. I mean, that's pitiful. Goodness gracious, that's horrible. So,
You love it.
the fact that they upset UNC last week, that's huge for them. So UNC was
They
just one of
beat
the
UNC
teams.
last year, too. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, it is weird. For some reason, I guess the Tar Heels cannot figure them out. And, we were just a week ago, you and I were talking about how maybe UNC is one of these sleeper teams that nobody's talking about maybe making the playoff if they do kind of go out and dominate the rest of the way and they win the ACC. Maybe they do squeeze into that 4 spot if it comes down to it. Now we're no longer having that conversation anymore.
No.
They got the Tennessee
Well,
treatment, and you're all of a sudden out of it.
for perspective, when we had that conversation, it was last week. They had Georgia Tech, North Carolina State, and Clemson. So the thought was if they win the first 2 games, they play against Clemson in the ACC championship game, they win that game. At that point, they are a 11-1 or 12-1 ACC champion. At that point, yeah, they would have a conversation to be up there with like the USC, who would be a 12-1 Pac-12 champion, or a TCU they're undefeated still. But you get my point. That I'm saying is like they would have been in the conversation, especially after beating Clemson at that point, who has now creeped up into the top 10 again, and they're having a better season. But no, Georgia Tech is a team it's a weird one. They beat Virginia Tech. They had a few big wins early. They beat Duke early in the season, and they just beat North Carolina. That's a team that, like, once again, we thought might be better. So it's not a team that you completely overlook. I think this is one of those games, like you said, we might get some rain. It depends on how heavy it is and what it looks like. It could be one of those games where you just assert your dominance in the sense of we're bigger than you, so we're going to run the heck out of the ball, and we're going to run for 300 yards today. It's not going to put up 45 points on the board probably, but we're just going to dominate you for 4 quarters of the football game, and it's going to be a run-heavy game. If it rains a lot, that's what you'll probably see, and so you expect a guy like Kenny McIntosh or maybe Dejon Edwards or even Branson Robinson breaking out and having a big game this week. That's kind of what I'm looking for this Saturday. I don't know about you, but I think that you get one of those running backs has a big game this coming weekend. That's kind of what my prediction is.
Yeah, running backs are probably going to eat this weekend. Georgia's going to eat this weekend, and they're going to finish with an undefeated record more than likely, like a 99.9% chance that they do so. But you know who else is going to be eating this week, Stoddard? Us. We get to eat. The people get to eat. All I want to do is freaking eat, as Kirby Smart would say.
I want you to eat.
That is the mood for tomorrow, Thanksgiving Day tomorrow. So that's what we're going to come into King of the Hill this week. We had to do food edition. We had to bring it back. All off season, we did a lot of food editions, kind of talked about our opinions on things, whether pineapple belonged on pizza. We even brought in food to the studio, and we ate the one chip challenge. And Lord have mercy, do we regret that? Never again. But now we're here. We're going to talk about Thanksgiving food. There's a lot of controversial opinions about what belongs on a Thanksgiving table. What are you putting on your plate? What are you not putting on your plate? So I want you to just give me the rundown, Starter. When you're in line, what are you looking for? What are you looking for to make sure that, I got to make sure I get that on my plate? And what are you also scoping out like, nah, fam, we staying away from that. That's not looking right this year. So, like, what are you kind of looking for as you're looking at your Thanksgiving setup?
My plate is gonna be like I'll eat a little bit of everything because it's Thanksgiving, so you got to taste something. Sometimes it might be different this year, or somebody else made it or whatnot. Things can be different, right? But like the things that I load up heavy on, your green bean casserole has got to be that's top tier for me. I like broccoli casserole is really good. Sometimes a good hash brown casserole on there, and I'm one of those guys too. Like I'll get the mac and cheese and stuff like that. Like we talked about that pre-show. Some people think you can get it all year long, but hey, I mean I'm still gonna get that. I'm the same. Dan just said something in there too, and I'm a huge ham guy. I'm a huge ham guy on Thanksgiving. My hot take for this topic is ham's better than turkey, even on Thanksgiving. I will get some turkey because it's Thanksgiving. You got to eat a little bit, but I would load up my plate on ham way before I'm going to load up on turkey, even on Thanksgiving. I know some people probably don't agree with that. Turkey has been made several different ways for me. I've had it fried. I've had it, I've had it smoked. That's pretty good. Still, nothing beats that honey baked ham, even on Thanksgiving. I'm just saying. Things I avoid. I'm just not a big squash person, so like a squash casserole, not really too big for me. Hit or miss for me is dressing or stuffing. It depends on how it tastes that year. Sometimes it's okay. Sometimes it's not so great, but it just kind of depends. But yeah, that's my rundown. And a good roll. You got to have a good dinner roll with something on there as well to kind of top everything off before you get to the desserts.
Yeah, definitely got to have that in the mix as well. I'm with you on the ham turkey take. I 100% would rather have ham than turkey. I'll grab me a piece or two, because yeah, turkey's not typically something you eat throughout the year. So yeah, I'm going to put it on the plate. But for me, my must-haves, if it's done right, mac and cheese. I think everybody agrees on that. It has to be done right because, man, if you screw it up, it is so disappointing. So it's got to be done right. But mac and cheese is definitely one of them. Deviled eggs for me, big deviled egg guy. So, but again, there's it's so funny because right. all these foods that you list, they got to be done right. They have to be done a specific way to your liking. But if
The way
they're done
mama
right,
makes it. It's got to be the way
yeah,
mama makes it. You know what I mean?
yep, the
It's
way
the way you
mama
grew
makes
up
it,
eating it.
and
It's got to be like that.
not too many people could do it the way mama makes it. So another one for me is sweet potato casserole, sweet potato souffle. Like, oof, I like that as well. My mom makes a killer sweet potato souffle, so I'm a big guy on
Yeah.
that as well. Um, One thing I will not, and I refuse to, is I am not putting cranberry sauce
Oh
anywhere near
yeah.
my Thanksgiving plate. I don't care what anybody says. I don't understand the hype around it. It is disgusting when it comes out of the can. It it does not look appealing coming out of the can. It just looks it's just a nasty looking dark jello, and I'm not a fan of it. I
Yeah.
tried it and I was like, this is what everybody's hyped up about, is that we have a cranberry sauce. This is what we're looking forward to every year. Like, come on, man. There's so much better stuff out there on the Thanksgiving spread that you got to take advantage of. But me and you, we kind of see the same. Definitely, I'm definitely a big green bean casserole guy. I mean, casseroles
Oh
in
yeah.
general, and this is the beauty of
Most of the
Thanksgiving is that,
casseroles, man, they slap.
yeah.
Most
And
of them are so
the
freaking
best
good.
thing, the best thing about casseroles is that when you take it home the next day and you eat it after a night, all those flavors soak in together. And so when you reheat
Oh
it up,
yeah.
it just tastes even better. Now, after a few days, you're kind of like, all right, can we just toss out these Thanksgiving leftovers? Because you'll be eating on them for the next 5 days. At some point, just like, all right, just
I get
stick
to
it
the
all on your
weekend.
plate.
Yeah, I get to the weekend. So I'll eat it on like Friday, obviously, and I'll eat it on Saturday. After that, I'm usually done. I'm like, I can't. I need something else. Get me a pizza or something different because I've had this for 3 straight days now, constant. Like I need something different. But that's just. But yeah, Thanksgiving. One thing that is really really good, and because I just talked about this a second ago, not being the best thing. One thing that I do like to have afterwards, after Thanksgiving, is the turkey because I will make a really good turkey
Mm.
sandwich. That turkey sandwich is top tier.
Hey,
It
those
really
honey
is.
baked ham sandwiches be hitting too,
Those are
though.
two. Those are two. But as far as like a leftover Thanksgiving like food, that is where the turkey really comes into play. I will eat the turkey the next couple of days at lunch. I'll eat a turkey sandwich or something like that, and then put some other stuff on the side, like some green bean casserole or something with it, and I'm just that's how I do it. That's when I eat most of the turkey. On Thanksgiving Day, I usually don't eat the turkey that much, but that's just me.
Dan, I should have known that you were a mac and cheese is mid type of dude. I
Oof.
don't care, man. Wait, like if it's good enough to where
How
you
in
can
his
eat it,
statement? Hold on. How can he? This statement is like it contradicts itself. My wife makes a killer 7 cheese mac and cheese, but Dan's hot take is mac and cheese is mid. How does that make sense? If she makes a killer 7 cheese mac and
yeah,
cheese, it's
man.
not mid, my man.
Yeah, like and typically like throughout the year, like when you have mac and cheese, like typically people are just making it from the box. Like you're getting the Velveeta mac and cheese or you're getting the Kraft mac and cheese or whatever. When people go all in and they make a good like baked mac and cheese, it's top
Oh
tier.
yeah.
You, I refuse to believe anything else. But now you're asking about best dessert. For me personally, I've always been a huge banana pudding guy. Another thing that my mom
Ooh.
makes, she makes it typically for my birthday or something like that. Love banana pudding. That's definitely up on the list. My One of my great aunts as well makes caramel cake. If you don't know anything about caramel cake, it is a really touchy cake to bake. And so when she makes that, I jump all over it, and it is so freaking good. So those would be my top two: caramel cake and banana pudding are the two that I'm hunting down.
I've always been all right. So I'll say the traditional thing that everybody kind of knows. I've always been a huge like apple pie and ice cream kind of guy, like the scoop of ice cream on top of like a warm piece of apple pie. Now the apple pie has to be the crumble crust, like
Yes,
or crumble topping.
yes.
The crumble top. I'll eat the other one, right? And I think actually tomorrow we don't have the crumble one because they didn't have it, so we got a regular
Mom
apple
sold
pie.
out,
It's
huh?
still good.
Dang.
It's still good, but the crumble one, the crumble topping. Oh my god, you put that with some ice cream, vanilla ice cream, and it is top tier dessert right there for me. The other one, and it's not something that anyone else is going to know because it's kind of localized to a family thing. My mother-in-law makes the absolute best pistachio cake. It is like a bundt cake. Yeah, it's a bundt cake. And you make that face, but I'm going to bring you a piece. Look, I will see you next week. I will bring you a
I like
piece of
some
this. I promise you.
pistachios. I can get down with it.
It is a bundt cake, pistachio bundt cake. It's like I don't know exactly how they make it. It's kind of like something with like pistachio pudding is mixed into it and everything like that. Um, but and then on the top layer of it is like a cinnamon crunch type
Ooh.
topping, and it is. I'm telling you, when I tell you that thing, that's That's like my favorite dessert of all time at this point. It really is. And I promise you, I might be hyping it up a little bit much, but I'm going to bring it to you next week, and you can tell the
Dude,
people,
I would love to try that.
what you think, because that thing, that's the dessert right there. I will
I'm
eat.
definitely
She
intrigued.
For my birthday, or like Christmas. I think at Christmas last year, she made me an entire cake of it, and that was like part of my Christmas present. And
Daggone.
I gave one person a piece of it, and I destroyed the rest of it. I mean, it is like absolutely insane.
Your same reason for like what makes a good apple pie is you got to have the crumble topping. That's why I've always preferred. Gosh, I'm blanking right now. Oh, cobbler, like apple cobbler or peach
Ooh, yeah,
cobbler.
peach
That's why I've
cobbler is
always
so
preferred
good.
cobblers over pies because you always get that good crunch topping, and then it's
Yeah.
always stupid good with some ice cream in it. You heat it up a
Oh,
little bit, the ice cream kind of melts in it, but you still got a little dollop of ice cream as well. Undefeated, definitely one of the best holiday desserts as well. So, but I think that kind of concludes it for our rundown of Thanksgiving. We hope you guys are able to enjoy it with your families and everything like that tomorrow. Hope you guys have a great day. Eat a lot of good food. We're super thankful for you guys, the people that tune into us, that help support us, that hit the subscribe button, that hit the like button every single video, that leave comments, people like you guys in the live chat right now, and even you guys that listen to us on the podcast form as well. We appreciate all of you guys. We're super thankful for you guys, and I hope you guys have a lot to be thankful for as well. Another way you can help us out, we have the socials. You guys know the rundown, Dr. _J-Will, the Stodfather, and the Classic City Pod over on Twitter. You can get all the alerts for our show over on the Bird app. And then, as always, like I said, hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit the like button, and Stoddard, you got the rest of it.
we love all of you guys. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope everybody has a great time with their family. We look forward. Make sure you tag us in some pictures on social media with your families, or with the meal, your spread that you have, your plate that you make, all that kind of stuff. We love to see what everybody else does on Thanksgiving, and hopefully you guys enjoy the time with your families. It's a special time of year. The next couple of months here, you get to spend time with your families and everything like that, and get close to everybody. So hopefully everybody has a really, really good Thanksgiving. We will catch you guys back next week on there. But as always, keep it classy in the Classic City, and we will see you guys next week. Happy Thanksgiving.